Hi, I'm really hoping that you all are safe and doing well. First of all, I would like to wish each one of you a fantabulous Happy New Year because the last year has been so tough for each one of us, but we became even more tougher out of it. So I'm really hoping that this year will bring more prosperity, stability, and a sense of gratification in your life because this is a new year. So think like it's a new beginning, and I'm hoping that things will definitely change. The only piece of advice I'll give it to you is just follow your heart. Stop caring about others. Listen to your inner voice. And it's time to invest in yourself. So, once again, Happy New Year. So, today I'm going to discuss one of the most essential topic of the Scrum framework known as the Scrum Artifacts, because the Scrum Artifact is considered one of the cornerstone of the Scrum framework. And in this video, I'm going to discuss the three Scrum Artifacts in their profound details. So at the end of this video, you'll get to know all the basic information about the Scrum Artifacts, what are their advantages, how they are interrelated with each other, and most importantly, what is their significance in the Scrum framework. So without any delay, let's just get started. The first logical question we need to ask to ourselves is, what is exactly a Scrum artifact? And a natural response to that question could be, is it a Scrum ceremony? Or it could be a Scrum event, or it could be a document, or it could be a Scrum event. But in reality, and in simple terms, a Scrum artifact is basically a set of tools that help the Scrum teams in implementing the entire Scrum framework. Furthermore, it is a set of tools that basically help the Scrum teams in completing the Scrum projects. Let us see first that what are the basic advantages of having the Scrum artifacts, because the Scrum artifacts is a set of tools as we defined before. They are basically helping the teams in implementing the Scrum framework and completing the Scrum, helping the teams to complete the Scrum projects. So the first advantage is that the Scrum artifacts basically helps the team ensuring that your team is accomplishing everything to reach the final deliverable, because the way the Scrum work is that it divides the whole project into small batches, which we used to call Scrum sprints. So each Scrum sprint could last from 1 to 4 weeks depending upon the nature and complexity of the Scrum project. So for each sprint, at the end of each sprint, we create a one increment. So the Scrum artifact basically helps in achieving everything to reach to that increment. Furthermore, these Scrum artifacts are actually the enablers for identifying and documenting the work needed to complete the project successfully, which means that they are the enablers. They do each and everything in accomplishing the final product you are going to create at the end of each sprint. It's time to see the three well-known Scrum artifacts are. And the three well-known Scrum artifacts are three, two, one. The first is product backlog, and the second sprint backlog, and the third artifact is known as the product increment. And these three are the Scrum well-known artifacts. Let's look into each artifact individually and discuss it and see that what exactly this artifact is, and then even more importantly, what are the attributes of each artifact. The first Scrum artifact, as we have seen earlier, is the product backlog. So what exactly a product backlog is? A product backlog is a source for all the product requirements. It's basically a set of all the project requirements that is collected by the product owner from different business executives, project stakeholders, team, end users, any other stakeholders that are actually related to the project. So it's basically again a complete set of project requirements, and based on that project requirements, the team will actually build the product. So once the product owner has gathered all the business requirements, the next step is the product owner actually sorts and prioritize the backlog items, which means that the product owner sits with his team and prioritize all the backlog items, which means the requirements that the sponsor, the stakeholder want them to build at first, and depending upon the priority. The product owner sits with his team and always prioritize the product backlog before actually the start of the current sprint, because once the product backlog is prioritized, the product owner and the team sits together and decide which items from the product backlog they are going to choose and attack depending upon their capacity, which means that which items have the priority from the business side to be developed by the teams as first. Another very important attribute about the product backlog is that the Scrum teams, they always estimate and define their capacity to attack the items in the current product backlog, which means that before actually taking the items for their first sprint, the team sits with the product owner and estimates their capacity to consume the items for their current sprint. And then the development team always choose to work on the most important items, which is the rule of the Scrum, that what's the project stakeholders and the project sponsor want them to build, the team always choose the top priority items from the product backlog in their. The most important property of the product backlog you need to be familiar with is that the backlog refinement, which is also known as backlog grooming, it's an ongoing activity, and this is always being performed by the product owner and his team, development team, and they always work in harmony, which means that throughout the project, the requirements are actually changing, because agile means a changing environment where requirements keeps on changing, and the product owner always sits with his team and always groom the project backlog, refine the project backlog depending upon which items again the stakeholders want them on priority, and this is known as product backlog grooming. As I have mentioned before, that once the product owner has sit with his team and prioritize the product backlog, it's time for the team to choose which of the items they are going to pick for their first iteration. So the items the team chooses to pick for their first iteration becomes a sprint backlog, and that's the second artifact of the Scrum framework. So a sprint backlog is basically a subset of a product backlog, a smaller set of the project requirements the team is actually picking from the product backlog for development in their first iteration. And the sprint backlog actually sets the goal for the current iteration. All the items the team is actually going to attack on their first sprint would be actually the goal of that sprint. Sprint backlog can also be visualized as a small view of the project to be accomplished in the current sprint, because the way Scrum work is that again it works in iterations, in sprints, and at the end of each sprint, the development team creates an increment. So an increment doesn't actually reflect a complete product, but a smaller subsection of a product. So it's basically a smaller view of the product to be accomplished in the sprint. One of the important property of the sprint backlog, that sprint backlog is always updated and refined by the development team, which is one of the rule of the Scrum. And most importantly, the product owner and the development team are throughout in their project work in harmony. In the Scrum framework, at the end of each sprint, the development team always creates something which we used to call as the product increment, and it is the third artifact of the Scrum framework. So what exactly a product increment is? A product increment is final outcome of the crunch sprint, which means that the team at the end of each sprint has produced a final outcome, which is referred to as the product increment. So the product increment represents a small chunk of the project. It doesn't represent the entire project, but a smaller chunk of the project the team has produced at the end of each sprint. And our increment could be anything. It could be a prototype, which means a working model, a draft, a working version of the final product. Remember the second value of the Agile manifesto? You can just see in this at the top of the screen, I have created a separate video about the Agile manifesto. So the second value of the Agile manifesto says that working software or comprehensive documentation. So this is the working software that at the end of each sprint, always the development team creates something which is a product increment, which doesn't actually represent the entire project but a smaller chunk of it. And then the backlog refinement, which is a backlog grooming, this is always performed by the product owner, his development team, which means that the backlog grooming is an ongoing activity throughout the project, and the product owner and his team sits together and they always prioritize the project backlog depending upon the requirements they are continuously receiving from different business executives, stakeholders, teams, any other stakeholders, end users. So this activity is an ongoing thing, and the most important part is that the product owner and his development team must be in agreement of what done means for an increment. So what is the definition of done? Definition of done in a Scrum framework is basically a common criteria against which your customer, your end user, your project stakeholders are actually inspecting what the team has created against the initial requirements, and acceptance or denial had been made based on that inspection. So this is the definition of done. So at the end of each sprint, the product owner and the team must be in agreement what exactly done is as part of this increment is. With this, we have now reached to the end of this video, and I'm really hoping that this video has well equipped you about the fundamental understanding about the Scrum artifact, their use cases, their significance in the Scrum framework. So let me know, what do you feel about this topic is, what are your thoughts about the Scrum artifacts, and most importantly, give me your feedback about how I can actually increase the level of my content, the level of my delivery. So your feedback will definitely help me in improving it. So if you like this video, please subscribe my channel and hit the bell icon. And till the next video, bye bye.